Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a luxury lakeside cabin, watching your girlfriend of 3 years casually mention that she's invited another man to join your romantic weekend retreat. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The same retreat you'd planned for months, complete with hiking trails you'd researched, restaurants you'd booked, and activities designed specifically for the two of you. Now imagine your response being so calm, so measured, that everyone in the room starts questioning whether you've completely lost your mind, or if you're playing a game they don't understand. That was me last weekend at Lake Tahoe, and what happened next changed everything. The whole thing started on a Thursday evening when I got home from another 14-hour day at the office. My startup had been gaining serious traction, and we were on the verge of closing a deal that would essentially set us up for life. I'd been looking forward to this Lake Tahoe getaway for weeks, not just because Rachel and I needed quality time together, but because I genuinely thought a change of scenery might help me clear my head before the final investor meetings. I walked into our Portland apartment expecting to find Rachel packing, or at least excited about our departure the next morning. Instead, I found her on the couch, scrolling through her phone with that particular expression she got when she was about to drop news she knew I wouldn't love. You know the look, the one where someone's trying to appear casual while internally preparing for battle. "Hey babe," she said without looking up. "So I hope you don't mind, but I invited Brandon to come with us this weekend." I stopped dead in my tracks. Brandon Walsh was this guy she'd been talking about for the past month, someone she'd met through her social media marketing work. According to Rachel, he was hilarious, adventurous, and exactly the kind of person who could make any trip more fun. She'd shown me his Instagram a few times, always with comments about how he lived such an exciting life, traveling to exotic locations and posting these perfectly curated adventure shots. The reasonable response would have been immediate questions. Why would you invite someone else to our romantic getaway? When did you decide this? Did you think I might want input on completely changing our plans? Instead, I found myself setting down my laptop bag with deliberate calm and asking, "When's he arriving?" Rachel's head snapped up, clearly expecting a different reaction. "Tomorrow morning. He's driving up separately, but I figured we could all meet at the cabin around noon." She paused, studying my face. "You're not upset? Should I be?" I asked, genuinely curious about her reasoning. "Well, no, but—" She seemed thrown off by my composure. "I just thought you might want it to be just us, you know?" I walked over to the kitchen and started making myself a sandwich, taking my time with each ingredient. "Rachel, if you wanted to invite someone else, that's your choice. It's going to be an interesting weekend." The confusion on her face was almost comical. She'd clearly prepared for an argument, maybe even wanted one. Rachel had this pattern of creating drama and then positioning herself as either the victim or the voice of reason, depending on which role served her better in the moment. But my calm acceptance seemed to short-circuit whatever script she'd been planning to follow. "Are you being sarcastic?" she pressed. "Not at all. Brandon seems like a nice guy from what you've told me. I'm sure we'll all have a great time." I took a bite of my sandwich and continued. "Actually, this might work out perfectly." That last comment hung in the air, and I could see Rachel trying to decode what I meant. The truth was, I'd been thinking a lot about our relationship lately, especially during those long nights at the office. 3 years together, and increasingly, I'd been noticing how different our approaches to life had become. Rachel seemed to crave constant stimulation, new experiences, and validation from others, while I'd been focused on building something substantial and lasting. The next morning, Rachel was unusually quiet during our drive up to Lake Tahoe. She kept glancing at me as if waiting for delayed anger or hurt feelings to surface. Instead, I spent the drive making phone calls about work, confirming details for Monday's investor presentation, and genuinely enjoying the scenic route through the mountains. When we arrived at the cabin, I had to admit Rachel had chosen well. The place was stunning, right on the water with floor-to-ceiling windows and a deck that extended out over the lake. Under different circumstances, it would have been the perfect romantic escape. I started unloading our bags while Rachel immediately began setting up what she called content creation stations around the cabin, positioning her phone to capture the best lighting for social media posts. Brandon arrived about an hour later in a lifted truck that looked like it cost more than most people's annual salary. He was exactly what I'd expected from his social media presence. Tall, athletic build, designer outdoor gear that had probably never seen actual outdoor use, and that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been truly challenged. David, right? He extended his hand with a grin that was just a little too wide. Rachel's told me so much about you. Thanks for letting me crash your weekend, man. No problem at all, I replied, shaking his hand. Actually, I'm glad you're here. This might be exactly what this weekend needed. Both Rachel and Brandon looked puzzled by that response, but I didn't elaborate. Instead, I suggested we get settled and figure out our plans for the day. Rachel immediately launched into an itinerary she'd apparently coordinated with Brandon, involving a hike to some waterfall that would provide excellent photo opportunities, followed by an afternoon at a beach club where Brandon knew the manager. That sounds great, I said, but I'm actually going to pass on the hike. I've got some calls to make, and then I thought I'd explore the area on my own for a bit. Rachel's face fell. But I planned this whole thing for us to do together. You planned it for you and Brandon, I corrected gently. I'm perfectly happy doing my own thing. You two go ahead and have fun. The look that passed between Rachel and Brandon was fascinating. She seemed almost panicked by my lack of resistance to their obvious plan to exclude me, while he appeared confused that I wasn't playing the role of the jealous, territorial boyfriend. They left for their hike around 11, Rachel still throwing concerned glances back at me as they walked down the trail. The moment they were out of sight, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in months. I made my work calls from the deck, watching boats move across the lake and thinking more clearly than I had in weeks. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Tyler Brooks, my best friend and business partner, calling to check on how the weekend was going. Dude, please tell me you're not actually sitting in a cabin right now doing work, Tyler said. I'm sitting on a deck overlooking Lake Tahoe doing work, I corrected, and having one of the most productive days I've had in months. What about Rachel? I thought this was supposed to be your romantic getaway. I found myself laughing, which surprised me. Rachel's off hiking with Brandon Walsh. Remember that guy she's been mentioning? There was a long pause. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Wait. She invited someone else to your romantic weekend? She did indeed. And you're okay with this? Tyler, I'm more than okay. I'm starting to think this might be the best thing that's happened to our relationship in years. I could hear Tyler moving around, probably pacing like he did when he was trying to process unexpected information. Okay, I'm going to need you to explain that logic. Have you ever had one of those moments where something happens that just makes everything crystal clear? Like suddenly all the pieces you'd been trying to force together just naturally fall into place? Are you having some kind of breakdown? The opposite, actually. I'm having a breakthrough. What I didn't tell Tyler, what I hadn't fully articulated even to myself until that moment, was how relieved I felt to have permission to stop pretending. For months, maybe even the entire past year, I'd been going through the motions of being the devoted boyfriend while Rachel seemed increasingly dissatisfied with our life together. She wanted constant adventure, new experiences, and what she called living life to the fullest, which apparently meant surrounding herself with people who prioritized excitement over stability. Meanwhile, I'd been building something real. My app development company was about to close a deal worth more than Rachel spent on her entire lifestyle in a year. I had investors flying in from San Francisco on Monday specifically to discuss expansion opportunities. I'd been working toward this for 3 years, sacrificing social events and spontaneous trips to focus on creating something lasting. Rachel had supported my work initially, but lately she'd been making comments about how I was becoming boring, how I never wanted to do anything fun anymore, how I was too focused on the future to enjoy the present. The irony was that everything I was building was for our future together, or at least that's what I'd been telling myself. But sitting on that deck, watching the lake and feeling genuinely peaceful for the first time in months, I realized I'd been approaching the whole situation wrong. I'd been trying to convince Rachel to value what I valued, while she'd been trying to convince me to value what she valued. Neither of us had been particularly successful, and both of us had been growing frustrated. Her invitation to Brandon wasn't really about him. It was about her need to introduce chaos and drama into what she perceived as my boring, predictable approach to life. She wanted me to fight for her, to show jealousy, to prove that I valued her more than my work. But what she'd actually done was give me permission to stop trying to be someone I wasn't. Around 4 o'clock, Rachel and Brandon returned from their hike, both glowing with exercise and whatever bonding had happened on the trail. Rachel immediately started showing me photos on her phone, pictures of them at various scenic spots, action shots of Brandon helping her climb over rocks, selfies with the waterfall in the background. "These are great," I said, and I meant it. "You two look like you had an amazing time." Brandon jumped in with stories about their adventure, how Rachel was such a natural athlete, how they'd discovered this hidden viewpoint that wasn't on any of the tourist maps. Rachel kept watching my face during his enthusiastic recounting, clearly waiting for signs of jealousy or territorial behavior. "That's fantastic," I said when he finished. "I'm really glad you both enjoyed it. I had a productive afternoon too." "Working?" Rachel's tone suggested this was somehow a personal failing. "Among other things. Actually, I got some interesting news today." I paused, knowing this would get their attention. "Remember that investor group I've been talking to? They've moved up our final presentation to Monday, and they're talking about doubling their initial offer." Brandon looked impressed despite himself. "What kind of business are you in?" I explained my app development company, the particular niche we'd carved out in productivity software, and the potential market expansion we were discussing. As I talked, I could see Brandon recalculating his assessment of me. Rachel, meanwhile, looked conflicted, as if she couldn't decide whether to be proud or annoyed that I was succeeding without her involvement. "That's really cool, man," Brandon said. "I've been thinking about getting into tech myself. Maybe we could talk more about it later." "Sure," I agreed. "Actually, Rachel, didn't you mention that Brandon has some social media marketing experience? That might be relevant to our user acquisition strategy." The conversation continued in this vein for the next hour, with all of us being perfectly polite and civilized. Rachel kept shooting me confused looks, clearly not understanding why I wasn't playing my expected role in whatever drama she'd been hoping to create. As evening approached, Rachel suggested we go to dinner at this lakeside restaurant she'd found online. It was exactly the kind of place that looked designed for Instagram posts. Rustic, but upscale, with string lights and a deck overlooking the water. We got a table with a perfect view of the sunset, and Brandon immediately started taking photos of Rachel against various backdrops. During dinner, the conversation flowed surprisingly well. Brandon was actually more intelligent than I'd initially given him credit for, with genuine insights about marketing and brand development. Rachel seemed happier and more animated than she'd been in months, laughing at Brandon's stories and playing up her adventurous side. I found myself genuinely enjoying the evening, partly because the pressure was off. I didn't have to entertain Rachel or try to be someone I wasn't. I could just be myself, contribute to the conversation when I had something relevant to say, and observe the dynamics playing out around me. After dinner, we walked along the lake shore. Rachel and Brandon fell into step together, pointing out constellations and talking about their shared love of adventure travel. I walked slightly behind them, checking messages and thinking about Monday's presentation. "David, you're being antisocial," Rachel called back to me. "I'm being myself," I replied. "And honestly, I'm having a great time just listening to you two talk." This seemed to frustrate her more than if I'd been openly angry. When we got back to the cabin, she pulled me aside while Brandon went to get something from his truck. "What's going on with you?" she asked. "You're acting weird." "I'm acting like myself. The question is, why does that bother you?" "It doesn't bother me, it's just different. Usually you're more—" She struggled to find the right word. "More what? More possessive? More insecure? More willing to compete for your attention?" Rachel's eyes widened. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She stared at me for a long moment, clearly not expecting the conversation to take this direction. "I just thought you'd care more about me spending the whole day with another guy." "Rachel, you're an adult. You can spend time with whoever you want. I'm not your keeper, and I'm not going to compete for your attention like we're in high school." Before she could respond, Brandon came back with a bottle of expensive whiskey, suggesting we have drinks on the deck. Rachel agreed immediately, but I could see she was still processing our conversation. As the evening progressed, I excused myself early, saying I had some preparation to do for Monday's meetings. This was true, but it was also strategic. I wanted to give Rachel and Brandon space to do whatever it was they were planning to do, without me as an audience or obstacle. From my room, I could hear them talking and laughing on the deck, their voices carrying on the still night air. Rather than feeling jealous or excluded, I felt something I hadn't experienced in our relationship for a long time: clarity. I spent the evening reviewing my presentation materials and thinking about the future. Not just the business future, but my personal future. What kind of life did I actually want? What kind of partner would complement rather than complicate my goals? What would it look like to be with someone who supported my ambitions instead of competing with them for attention? Around midnight, I heard Rachel come inside. She paused outside my door, and I could sense her debating whether to knock. Eventually, she went to her own room without saying anything. I could hear Brandon settling into the living room, where we'd set up the sleeper sofa for him. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that tomorrow would be interesting for entirely different reasons than Rachel had probably anticipated. She'd created this situation expecting drama, jealousy, and emotional chaos. Instead, she'd given me exactly what I needed: perspective, clarity, and the space to see our relationship for what it really was. The next morning would bring new revelations, but that night, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully, knowing that whatever happened next, I was finally being honest with myself about what I actually wanted from life. Saturday morning brought the kind of crisp mountain air that makes you understand why people pay premium prices for lake houses. I woke up early, as I always did, and found myself genuinely excited about the day ahead. Not because of any romantic plans with Rachel, but because I had a clear sense of purpose for the first time in months. I made coffee in the cabin's well-appointed kitchen and took my mug out to the deck, where I could watch the morning light dance across the water. The quiet was exactly what I needed to think clearly about how Rachel and I had gotten to this point. It wasn't like we'd woken up one day as strangers. The distance had grown gradually, so slowly that I'd almost convinced myself it was normal relationship evolution. Looking back, I could pinpoint when things started shifting. It was about 18 months ago when my company landed its first major client. I'd been working 18-hour days for weeks, pouring everything into making sure we delivered beyond expectations. Rachel had been supportive initially, bringing me dinner at the office, understanding when I had to cancel plans, even bragging to her friends about dating an entrepreneur. But as the success continued and the work demands grew, her support transformed into resentment. She started making comments about how I cared more about my computer screen than her. When I tried to explain that everything I was building was for our future together, she'd roll her eyes and say I was using our relationship to justify my workaholism. The irony was that Rachel had her own career ambitions. She'd started her social media marketing consultancy around the same time I launched my app development company. Initially, we'd been this power couple, both grinding toward our goals, supporting each other through the inevitable setbacks, and celebrating the wins together. But somewhere along the way, her definition of success had shifted from building something lasting to accumulating experiences and social validation. I remembered the exact conversation where I first noticed the fundamental disconnect in our values. We'd been at Tyler's birthday party about 6 months ago, and Rachel had spent the entire evening taking photos for her Instagram stories, instead of actually engaging with our friends. When I mentioned it on the drive home, she'd accused me of being jealous of her social media success. "You just don't understand how important personal branding is," she'd said. "While you're buried in code, I'm building a lifestyle that people actually want to follow." "But what's the end goal?" I'd asked. "What are you building toward?" "I'm living in the moment, David. You should try it sometime." That conversation had stuck with me because it crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. Rachel seemed to believe that planning for the future meant missing out on the present, while I believed that being intentional about the present was how you created the future you wanted. Neither perspective was wrong, but they were fundamentally incompatible. Around 8:30, I heard movement inside the cabin. Rachel emerged first, looking like she'd spent considerable time getting ready despite it being a casual mountain morning. She'd chosen an outfit that would photograph well against the lake backdrop, complete with accessories that seemed more suited to a fashion shoot than a relaxing weekend. "Good morning," she said, settling into the chair next to mine with her own coffee. "You're up early. Same time as always. How did you sleep?" "Fine." She paused, clearly wanting to say more. "David, about yesterday." "What about it? Don't you think it's weird that you're so okay with Brandon being here?" I considered her question seriously. "Rachel, do you want me to be upset about it?" "No, but—" She struggled to find the right words. Most boyfriends would at least ask questions, like why I invited him, or what I was thinking, or whether I considered how you might feel about it. Would honest answers to those questions change anything? Rachel's coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you invited Brandon because you wanted to see how I'd react. You were thinking that our relationship needed some kind of dramatic catalyst to feel exciting again. And you didn't consider how I might feel about it because you assumed you already knew." I kept my tone conversational, not accusatory. Am I wrong about any of that? The silence stretched between us, filled only by the gentle lapping of water against the dock below. Rachel's face cycled through several expressions, as she processed what I'd said and decided how to respond. "That's not—" she started, then stopped. "You make it sound so calculated." "Isn't it?" Before she could answer, Brandon appeared in the doorway, stretching and yawning like he'd just rolled out of bed. His hair was perfectly tousled in that way that either took significant effort or incredible genetics, and even his casual morning look seemed curated for maximum appeal. "Morning, you two," he said, joining us on the deck. "This view is incredible. I can see why you picked this place, Rachel." "Actually, David found the cabin," Rachel corrected. "I just handled the booking." This was true, though it was interesting that she felt the need to clarify. I'd spent weeks researching Lake Tahoe accommodations, reading reviews, comparing amenities, and cross-referencing availability with our schedules. Rachel had wanted something that would look good in photos, while I'd prioritized practical considerations like kitchen facilities, reliable Wi-Fi, and proximity to both hiking trails and business-friendly restaurants. "Great choice, man," Brandon said to me. "I was just thinking this would be perfect for a group retreat. You know, bringing together creative people for inspiration and collaboration." "That's an interesting idea," I replied. "What kind of creative people do you work with?" Brandon launched into an explanation of his various projects, which seemed to involve helping influencers and content creators develop their personal brands. As he talked, I found myself genuinely curious about his business model, even though his approach to work was completely different from mine. "The key is authenticity," he was saying. "People can tell when someone's just trying to sell them something versus when someone's genuinely sharing their lifestyle and values." "How do you define authenticity in a context where everything is essentially performance?" I asked. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you're consciously curating content to present a specific image, how do you maintain genuine connection with your audience?" Rachel looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. She'd always gotten defensive when I asked practical questions about her social media strategy, as if analyzing the mechanics somehow diminished the magic. Brandon, to his credit, gave the question serious thought. "I guess the authenticity comes from being honest about the curation, like acknowledging that you're showing the highlights while still being real about the process." "That makes sense," I said, and I meant it. Rachel's always been good at that balance. Rachel's expression softened slightly at the compliment, but I could see her trying to figure out my angle. She'd become accustomed to our conversations about her work turning into subtle criticisms of her priorities. The truth was, I'd never had a problem with Rachel's social media career itself. What bothered me was how it seemed to be changing her fundamental approach to experiences. Everything became content first and genuine enjoyment second. We couldn't go to dinner without her photographing the food. Couldn't take a hike without stopping for outfit photos. Couldn't have a quiet evening together without her documenting it for her stories. I'd started to feel like I was dating a performance rather than a person. "So what's the plan for today?" Brandon asked, clearly ready to move past theoretical discussions and into action. Rachel immediately perked up. "I found this amazing breakfast place in town that's supposed to have the best mountain views. Then I thought we could rent kayaks and explore the lake." There's also this cute little arts district we could walk through. Sounds perfect, Brandon agreed. David, you in? Actually, I'm going to tackle some work this morning, then maybe meet up with you guys later. You two should definitely check out that breakfast place, though. I'd love to hear about it. Rachel's face fell. David, it's Saturday. Can't the work wait? It could, but I'm actually enjoying having the time to focus. Besides, you and Brandon clearly have great taste in adventures. You should explore without having to accommodate my schedule. This wasn't entirely altruistic. I genuinely did have work to do. But more importantly, I wanted to see how Rachel and Brandon interacted when they thought they had complete freedom. Would they actually enjoy each other's company? Or was the appeal primarily about the drama of the situation? Are you sure? Brandon asked, though he didn't sound particularly disappointed. We could find something more low-key if you prefer. I'm completely sure. Go have fun. An hour later, I watched them drive away in Brandon's truck, Rachel's laughter carrying back to me through the open windows. Instead of feeling excluded or jealous, I felt something closer to relief. For the first time in months, I had complete control over my time and attention. I set up my laptop on the dining table and dove into preparing for Monday's investor presentation. The work felt different in this environment, more creative and less pressured. I found myself thinking about the bigger picture of what we were building, not just the immediate technical challenges. Around noon, Tyler called to check in again. Please tell me you're not still working, he said without preamble. I'm working, but it doesn't feel like work. I'm actually having breakthrough insights about our user interface design, while your girlfriend is off with another dude. Tyler, I think I need to tell you something I haven't fully admitted to myself until this weekend. This sounds serious. I think Rachel and I have been over for months. We've just been too stubborn or scared to acknowledge it. There was a long pause. Tyler had been my business partner for 3 years and my friend for much longer. He'd watched my relationship with Rachel evolve from the passionate early days through the recent period of escalating tension. Can I ask you something without you getting defensive? He said finally. Go ahead. When's the last time you two had a conversation about something other than logistics or complaints? The question hit me harder than I'd expected. I tried to remember the last time Rachel and I had talked about ideas, dreams, books we'd read, movies that made us think, or even just random observations about life. Everything lately had been about schedules, social obligations, work frustrations, or relationship maintenance. I honestly can't remember, I admitted. And when's the last time you felt excited about spending time with her? Another difficult question. The truth was, I'd been looking forward to this weekend primarily as a break from work, not as quality time with Rachel. I'd been hoping the change of scenery might somehow rekindle something between us, but I hadn't really believed it would work. Tyler, I think this whole situation with Brandon might be the best thing that could have happened to us, because it's forcing you to face reality, because it's showing both of us what we actually want. Rachel wants excitement, spontaneity, and someone who prioritizes adventure over stability. I want partnership, shared goals, and someone who understands that building something meaningful requires sacrifice. Those aren't necessarily incompatible. They are the way we've been approaching them. Rachel sees my focus on work as rejection of her, and I see her need for constant stimulation as rejection of our shared future. We talked for another hour, with Tyler helping me think through the implications of what I was realizing. By the time I hung up, I felt clearer about the situation than I had in months. Rachel and Brandon returned around 4, full of stories about their day. They'd apparently had an amazing time, discovering hidden beaches, meeting interesting locals, and taking what Rachel described as some of her best content ever. As she showed me photos on her phone, I noticed how genuinely happy she looked in all of them. You two look like you had an incredible day, I said, and I meant it. We did, Rachel said, studying my face for signs of jealousy or hurt feelings, though it would have been better if you'd been there. Would it have been? I asked gently. The question clearly caught her off guard. She looked at Brandon, then back at me, as if trying to figure out whether this was a trap. Of course, it would have been, she said. But her tone lacked conviction. Rachel, You look happier in these photos than you've looked in months. You and Brandon clearly have similar energy when it comes to exploring and trying new things. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this conversation to take such a direct turn. What are you saying? Rachel asked. I'm saying that watching you two together today, seeing how naturally you sync up in terms of what you want to do and how you want to spend your time, it's made me realize some things about our relationship. The tension in the room was palpable. Rachel looked like she was bracing for an accusation or ultimatum, while Brandon seemed to be calculating whether he should excuse himself or stay to see how this played out. What kinds of things? Rachel asked cautiously. I'm realizing that we've been trying to force compatibility instead of acknowledging that we might want fundamentally different things from life. Rachel's eyes widened. This was clearly not the direction she'd expected the conversation to go. That's not true, she said quickly. We want the same things. We've always wanted the same things. Do we, Rachel? When you picture your ideal life 5 years from now, what does it look like? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it, clearly thinking hard about the question. I want to be successful in my career, have amazing experiences, travel to incredible places, build a life that inspires other people. And I want to build something lasting, create financial security, develop expertise in my field, and have a stable foundation for whatever comes next, I said. Neither vision is wrong, but they're different enough that we've been pulling each other away from what we actually want. The conversation continued for another hour, with all three of us navigating the delicate territory of acknowledging reality without assigning blame. Brandon, surprisingly, contributed thoughtful observations about relationship dynamics and personal growth that showed more depth than I'd initially credited him with. By the time we decided to make dinner together, something fundamental had shifted between all of us. We weren't pretending anymore, weren't trying to maintain facades or avoid difficult truths. We were just three people trying to figure out how to move forward honestly. As we cooked together in the cabin's kitchen, I found myself thinking about Amanda Rivera, my business partner who would be joining Monday's investor meeting. Amanda and I had developed an easy working relationship over the past year, built on shared values around quality, integrity, and long-term thinking. She brought marketing expertise that perfectly complemented my technical skills, and we'd collaborated on some of the most successful projects my company had ever undertaken. More than that, Amanda seemed to understand instinctively that building something worthwhile required patience, focus, and the willingness to delay gratification. She never made me feel like my dedication to work was a character flaw or a sign that I was missing out on life. Instead, she'd often stay late to help refine presentations or brainstorm solutions to complex problems, not because she had to, but because she was genuinely invested in our shared success. The contrast between Amanda's approach to partnership and Rachel's was becoming impossible to ignore. While Rachel saw my work as competition for her attention, Amanda saw it as an opportunity for collaboration. While Rachel wanted me to be more spontaneous and less focused on the future, Amanda helped me think strategically about how to achieve our goals more efficiently. That evening, as we sat around the fire pit outside the cabin, I realized that this weekend had given me more than just clarity about my relationship with Rachel. It had shown me what it felt like to stop trying to be someone I wasn't, to stop apologizing for my priorities, and to start being honest about what I actually wanted from life and partnership. The question now was what to do with that clarity. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after difficult truths have been acknowledged. I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months, not because my problems had disappeared, but because I finally understood what they actually were. The pretending was over, and that felt like freedom. Rachel was already awake when I emerged from my room, sitting at the kitchen counter with her laptop open and her phone propped up beside it. She was editing yesterday's photos, adding filters, and captions that would transform their spontaneous adventure into carefully curated content. "Morning," she said without looking up. "I'm just finishing up these posts from yesterday." "They look great," I said, and I meant it. Rachel had a genuine talent for visual storytelling, even if I sometimes questioned the authenticity of the stories being told. "David, about last night's conversation. What about it?" She finally looked up from her screen. "I keep thinking about what you said, about us wanting different things. But I don't think that's necessarily a problem we can't solve." I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter across from her. How do you see us solving it? Well, maybe we've just been approaching things wrong. Maybe instead of you trying to be more spontaneous and me trying to be more focused, we could find a middle ground. What would that look like? Rachel's face brightened, as if she'd been hoping I'd ask that question. Like, what if you took more breaks from work to do fun things with me, and I could be more supportive of your business goals? We could travel together for work trips, combine business with pleasure. It was a reasonable suggestion on the surface, the kind of compromise that relationship counselors probably recommended. But as I considered it, I realized it missed the fundamental issue entirely. Rachel, the problem isn't logistics. It's not about scheduling more fun time or finding ways to blend our priorities. Then what is it? It's that you see my dedication to work as something that needs to be fixed, and I see your need for constant stimulation as something that distracts from building anything lasting. We're not just incompatible in practice, we're incompatible in our core values about what makes life meaningful. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Rachel stared at her laptop screen, but I could see she wasn't really seeing it. "So what are you saying?" she asked quietly. Before I could answer, Brandon emerged from the living room, clearly having overheard at least part of our conversation. The awkwardness was palpable, but there was also something relieving about not having to pretend everything was normal. "Should I give you guys some privacy?" Brandon asked. "Actually, no," I said, surprising both of them. "Brandon, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Yesterday, when you and Rachel were exploring together, did it feel natural? Like you were both genuinely enjoying the same things in the same way?" Brandon glanced at Rachel uncertainly, clearly not sure how honest he should be. "You can be honest," Rachel said. "I want to know what you thought." "Yeah, it felt really natural," Brandon admitted. "We have similar energy, I guess. We both like trying new things, meeting new people, seeing where the day takes us." "And Rachel? How did that feel compared to when we do things together?" Rachel's expression was a mix of hurt and recognition. "Different," she said quietly. "Easier, maybe." "That's not a criticism of either of you," I said. "It's just information." I walked over to my phone, which had been charging on the counter, and saw several missed messages. 2 were from Tyler. 1 was from my assistant confirming Monday's meetings, and 1 was from Amanda Rivera. "Actually got some inspiration for the presentation while hiking yesterday," Amanda's message read. "Had a breakthrough about the user experience flow. Call me when you have a chance." I found myself smiling as I read it. This was exactly what I meant about compatibility. Amanda was the kind of person who could have a relaxing weekend and still make mental connections that improved our work. She didn't see business success and personal fulfillment as competing priorities. "I need to make a quick call," I told Rachel and Brandon. "Work stuff, but it's important." Rachel's expression tightened slightly, the old pattern of seeing work calls as personal rejection reasserting itself. But then she seemed to catch herself and nodded. I stepped out onto the deck and called Amanda. "David, perfect timing," she said immediately. "I was just thinking about our presentation tomorrow. I had this realization yesterday about how we're positioning the productivity benefits." "What kind of realization?" "We've been focusing on time savings and efficiency gains, but I think we're missing the bigger picture. What we're really offering is peace of mind. The ability to trust your systems so you can focus on creative and strategic thinking instead of worrying about details." As she explained her thinking, I found myself getting genuinely excited about the presentation for the first time. Amanda had a way of seeing the forest while I was focused on the trees, and our collaboration consistently produced results that neither of us could have achieved alone. "That's brilliant," I said when she finished. "It completely reframes the value proposition. Right? I was thinking we could restructure the demo to show that emotional benefit, not just the functional one." "Amanda, are you free to work on this today? I know it's Sunday, but if we could get this revision done." "I was hoping you'd ask. I'm already working on mock-ups. Want a video call in an hour?" "Perfect. And Amanda?" "Yeah. Thank you for understanding why this matters, for being willing to work weekends when it counts, for seeing the bigger picture." David, we're building something important together. Of course it matters. After I hung up, I stood on the deck for a moment, thinking about the contrast between that conversation and the one I just had with Rachel. Amanda and I were aligned not just in our goals, but in our approach to achieving them. We both understood that extraordinary results required extraordinary commitment. When I went back inside, Rachel and Brandon were deep in conversation about their plans for the day. They'd apparently decided to check out a farmer's market in town, then spend the afternoon at a beach club where Brandon knew someone who could get them VIP access. That sounds perfect for you two, I said. I'm going to spend the day working on tomorrow's presentation with my business partner. On Sunday? Rachel asked, though her tone was more resigned than accusatory. It's the biggest presentation we've ever given. The difference between getting this deal and not getting it could literally change everything. Brandon looked intrigued. What kind of deal? I explained the investor group we were meeting with, the expansion opportunities they represented, and the potential valuation we were discussing. As I talked, I realized I was genuinely excited about sharing the details, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because the work itself was genuinely exciting. That's incredible, man, Brandon said. No wonder you're willing to work weekends. When you put it like that, it seems crazy not to. Rachel's expression was harder to read. She seemed to be processing something, cycling through different emotions as she listened to Brandon validate my priorities in a way she'd been reluctant to do. You should definitely focus on that, she said finally. This could be huge for you. The conversation felt like a turning point, not just because Rachel was finally acknowledging the importance of my work, but because she was doing it without resentment. For the first time in months, she seemed to see my dedication as something admirable rather than something that diminished her. After Rachel and Brandon left for their day in town, I set up a proper workspace at the dining table and video called Amanda. Seeing her face on the screen, focused and energized about our project, reminded me what it felt like to work with someone who shared my values about excellence and commitment. Okay, show me these mock-ups, I said. For the next 4 hours we worked together with the kind of flow state that made time disappear. Amanda's insights about positioning complemented my technical expertise perfectly, and together we created a presentation that was significantly stronger than what either of us could have produced individually. This is going to blow them away, Amanda said as we finalized the last slide. We make a good team, I replied. And as soon as I said it, I realized the statement carried more weight than just professional collaboration. We do, she agreed, holding my gaze through the video call. David, can I say something that might be overstepping? Of course. You seem different today. More focused, but also more relaxed. Whatever's going on this weekend, it looks like it's been good for you. I found myself laughing. It's been clarifying, that's for sure. Good. You deserve clarity. You deserve to be with people who appreciate how hard you work and what you're building. The comment hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us was quite ready to address directly. Thank you, I said simply, for the work today, for understanding why it matters, for being the kind of partner who makes everything better. Same to you, David. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet cabin thinking about partnership in all its forms. Professional partnership, romantic partnership, the way two people could either amplify each other's strengths or constantly negotiate their differences. Rachel and Brandon returned around 6, full of stories about their day. They'd apparently had another amazing time, connecting with local artists, discovering hidden gems, and documenting everything for Rachel's social media. As they showed me photos and told me about the people they'd met, I was struck by how well-suited they were for each other. How was your work session? Rachel asked, settling into the chair across from me. Incredibly productive. We redesigned the entire presentation, and I think it's going to make all the difference tomorrow. That's great, David. Really. She paused. Can I ask you something? Sure. Your business partner, Amanda. How long have you been working together? About a year. Why? Just curious. You seem really excited when you talk about working with her. There was something in Rachel's tone that suggested she was picking up on the same undercurrents I'd been feeling. Rather than jealousy, though, she seemed genuinely curious. Amanda and I have similar approaches to work, I said carefully. We both believe in doing whatever it takes to achieve excellence. That sounds nice, Rachel said, and I could hear the wistfulness in her voice. That evening, the three of us cooked dinner together again, but the dynamic had shifted substantially from the previous night. Instead of carefully avoiding difficult topics, we found ourselves having honest conversations about life goals, relationship expectations, and what we each needed to feel fulfilled. "Can I say something without it being weird?" Brandon asked, as we were cleaning up. "Go ahead," Rachel and I said simultaneously. "I think you two are really brave for being so honest about this stuff. Most people would rather keep pretending everything's fine than actually deal with incompatibility." "It doesn't feel brave," Rachel said. "It feels scary." "Scary how?" I asked. "Scary because it means admitting that maybe we've been wrong about what we thought we wanted. Or maybe we've just grown into different people than we were when we got together." It was the most insightful thing Rachel had said about our relationship in months, and it gave me hope that we could navigate this transition with mutual respect rather than resentment. "People change," I said. "The question is whether they change in compatible directions." "And if they don't," Brandon asked, "then maybe the kindest thing they can do is acknowledge that and give each other permission to find better fits." Rachel looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Is that what you think we should do?" "I think we should be honest about what we've learned this weekend, and make decisions based on that, rather than on what we think we're supposed to want." The conversation continued late into the evening, with all of us sharing perspectives on relationships, personal growth, and the challenge of balancing individual fulfillment with partnership. By the time we went to bed, something had been resolved, even though nothing had been officially decided. As I packed my things for the drive back to Portland the next morning, I realized that this weekend had accomplished something I hadn't expected. Instead of saving my relationship with Rachel, it had shown both of us what we actually needed to be happy. And sometimes, that kind of clarity was the most valuable gift you could give someone, even if it meant letting them go. The drive back to the city would give me time to think about next steps, both professionally and personally. Monday's presentation suddenly felt like more than just a business opportunity. It felt like the beginning of a completely new chapter. Monday morning came with the weight of unfinished business and new possibilities. The drive back to Portland had been quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what the weekend had revealed. Brandon followed us in his truck for the first hour before splitting off toward his own destination, but not before exchanging contact information with Rachel and making plans to meet up later in the week. I dropped Rachel off at her apartment with a careful hug that felt more like saying goodbye to an old friend than a romantic partner. We'd agreed to talk more after I got through my presentation, but there was an understanding between us that fundamental decisions had already been made, even if we hadn't spoken them aloud yet. The investor presentation was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, which gave me the morning to meet with Amanda and finalize our strategy. I arrived at the office to find her already there, despite it being barely 8 a.m., putting finishing touches on the presentation materials. "Ready to change our lives?" she asked, looking up from her laptop with the kind of focused energy that made complex projects feel achievable. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," I replied, and I meant it. The presentation itself exceeded every expectation we'd had. The investors were not only impressed with our technical capabilities and market analysis, but genuinely excited about the vision Amanda and I had articulated for the company's future. By 4 o'clock, we had a preliminary agreement for funding that was double our initial projections, with timeline and milestone discussions scheduled for later in the week. "We did it," Amanda said as we walked out of the conference room, still somewhat stunned by how well everything had gone. "We absolutely did," I agreed. "Amanda, I couldn't have done this without you. Your insights about positioning made all the difference." She stopped walking and turned to face me directly. "David, can we talk? About more than just business?" "Of course. Not here, though. Somewhere we can actually have a conversation." We ended up at a quiet wine bar downtown, the kind of place where you could actually hear each other think. Amanda ordered something expensive that I'd never heard of, while I stuck with my usual craft beer. The contrast felt symbolic somehow, like we were celebrating not just our professional success, but the possibility of something entirely new. "So," Amanda said, raising her glass, "to successful partnerships." "To successful partnerships," I echoed, though I suspected we were talking about more than business. David, I have a confession, she said after we'd both taken a sip. I've been thinking about asking you out for months, but I didn't want to complicate our working relationship. What changed your mind? This weekend you seemed different, more settled, more confident about what you wanted. And after today, after seeing what we can accomplish together. She trailed off, studying my expression. I guess I decided that some risks are worth taking. I set down my beer and looked at her directly. Amanda, my relationship with Rachel is ending. It's been ending for months, but this weekend made it official, even though we haven't said the words yet. How do you feel about that? Relieved, mostly. We want different things, and we've been making each other miserable trying to pretend otherwise. And how do you feel about the possibility of exploring something with someone who shares your values and goals? The directness of the question was so perfectly Amanda that I found myself laughing. I feel like that would be the smartest decision I've made in years. She smiled, the kind of genuine expression that transformed her entire face. Good. Because I was prepared to make a very compelling argument if you'd said anything else. We spent the next 2 hours talking about everything that had been left unsaid during our months of professional collaboration, the attraction that had been building beneath the surface, the way we complemented each other's thinking, the shared vision we had for what success should look like. By the time we left the wine bar, something fundamental had shifted between us. I should probably go home and have the conversation with Rachel that we've been avoiding, I said as we stood on the sidewalk outside. That sounds like the right thing to do, Amanda agreed. Call me after? Definitely. The drive to Rachel's apartment gave me time to think about how to approach what was essentially a breakup conversation that had been 3 days in the making. Rachel had texted me earlier asking about the presentation and suggesting we meet to discuss everything, which I interpreted as her own recognition that decisions needed to be made. I found her waiting in her apartment with what looked like carefully prepared talking points. She'd changed out of her casual weekend clothes into something more formal, as if she were preparing for a business negotiation rather than a relationship conversation. How did the presentation go? She asked immediately. Better than we hoped. We got the funding, and probably more opportunities than we can handle. David, that's incredible. Her excitement seemed genuine, which made what came next feel even more bittersweet. Rachel, we need to talk about this weekend, about what it revealed. I know. She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about everything you said, about us wanting different things, and I think you might be right. The admission hung between us, heavy with 3 years of shared history. How do you feel about that? I asked. Scared, but also kind of relieved? Like maybe we've both been trying so hard to make something work that we stopped paying attention to whether it actually should work. That's exactly how I feel. Rachel was quiet for a moment, picking at the edge of a throw pillow. David, can I ask you something? And will you be completely honest? Of course. Do you think we ever really loved each other? Or did we just love the idea of being in love? It was such a perceptive question that I had to take time to consider it seriously. I think we loved who we thought the other person was going to become. You loved the idea that I'd eventually loosen up and become more spontaneous. I loved the idea that you'd eventually settle down and become more focused on building something lasting. But neither of us actually wanted to change in those ways. No, we didn't. And there's nothing wrong with that. We just weren't compatible with who the other person actually is. The conversation continued for another hour, with both of us working through the practical and emotional aspects of ending our relationship. It was strange how much easier it was to be honest, once we'd both accepted that we were moving toward separation rather than trying to save something that had been broken for months. What happens now? Rachel asked. I think we both focus on building the kinds of lives we actually want, with people who complement those visions instead of competing with them. Speaking of which, Rachel said with a small smile, Brandon asked me out officially for this Friday. How do you feel about that? Excited, in a way I haven't felt about dating in years. He gets my energy, David. He doesn't see my need for adventure and new experiences as character flaws that need to be fixed. That's how it should be, I said, and I meant it. Rachel, I want you to be happy. I want you to find someone who loves the parts of you that I've been trying to change. Same to you. And David? I think your business partner Amanda might be exactly what you're looking for. The comment surprised me with its perceptiveness. What makes you say that? The way you talk about working with her, the way you light up when you describe your projects together. It's obvious that you two are aligned in ways that you and I never were. 2 days later, Rachel made what I initially thought was a last-ditch effort to salvage our relationship, but quickly realized was something else entirely. She showed up at my office during lunch hour, looking more put together than she had in months. I need to talk to you, she said, clearly agitated. What's wrong? I made a mistake, David. This whole thing with Brandon, this idea that we should break up. I think I got caught up in the excitement of something new and lost sight of what we've built together. Rachel, what are you talking about? We spent the entire weekend realizing that we want fundamentally different things. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I can be more supportive of your work, more understanding of your priorities. Maybe we just need to try harder. Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this speech. More concerning was the desperation underlying them, a quality I'd never associated with Rachel before. What happened with Brandon? I asked. Nothing happened. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Rachel's composure cracked slightly. I saw the announcement about your funding. David, this is huge. This changes everything about your future, your financial situation, your opportunities. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Rachel, are you trying to get back together with me because of money? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe I was too hasty in thinking we couldn't make it work. Maybe the timing was just wrong before. But now that my company is worth significantly more, suddenly our incompatibilities seem manageable? Rachel's face flushed red. You're making it sound so calculating. Isn't it? The silence that followed was devastating. I could see Rachel trying to formulate a response that would deny the obvious truth, but we both knew what had motivated this sudden change of heart. I think you should leave, I said quietly. David, please. Can't we just talk about this? We did talk about it. We spent an entire weekend talking about it. We both agreed that we wanted different things, and we both felt relieved about ending the relationship. The only thing that's changed since then is my financial prospects. That's not fair. Rachel, what's not fair is you trying to manipulate me into a relationship that we both know doesn't work just because circumstances have changed in my favor. She left without another word, but I could see the anger building in her expression. Over the next week, that anger manifested in increasingly desperate attempts to either win me back or punish me for rejecting her overtures. First came the social media campaign. Rachel began posting throwback photos of us together with captions about true love and fighting for what matters. She tagged me in posts about successful couples who had overcome challenges and shared quotes about not giving up on relationships during difficult times. When I didn't respond to the social media pressure, she escalated to more direct tactics. She started showing up at places she knew I'd be, looking devastated and trying to engage me in conversations about our mistake in breaking up. She called Tyler, claiming to be worried about my emotional state and suggesting that I was making decisions based on work stress rather than genuine feelings. The final straw came when she appeared at the office during a meeting with potential new clients, claiming she needed to pick up some belongings she'd left in my car. The scene was embarrassing and unprofessional, exactly the kind of drama I'd been trying to avoid. Rachel, this has to stop, I told her firmly as I walked her out of the building. I'm not doing anything wrong, she said. I'm fighting for our relationship. Our relationship is over. We both agreed to that. What you're doing now isn't fighting for love. It's refusing to accept reality. Reality is that you're making a huge mistake, and someday you're going to realize it. As I watched her drive away, I realized that this desperate phase was probably inevitable. Rachel had built so much of her identity around our relationship that accepting its end meant accepting that she'd misjudged what she wanted from life. It was easier to blame me for being unreasonable than to acknowledge that we'd simply grown incompatible. The irony was that her attempts to win me back only confirmed everything I'd realized at Lake Tahoe. We operated from completely different value systems, and no amount of effort was going to bridge that gap. That evening, Amanda called to check on me after hearing about the office incident from Tyler. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than I expected, honestly. Rachel's desperation is just confirming that ending things was the right decision." "Good. Because I have news that might cheer you up." "What kind of news?" "The kind that involves dinner reservations at that new restaurant downtown and a conversation about our future together, both professional and personal." I found myself smiling for the first time in days. "Amanda Rivera. Are you asking me out on an official date?" "David Chen. I absolutely am." 6 months later, I stood in the same Lake Tahoe cabin where everything had changed, but this time with Amanda beside me. We'd returned to celebrate the successful launch of our expanded platform and to plan the next phase of our company's growth. The view was just as stunning as I remembered, but my perspective on everything else had transformed completely. Amanda was reviewing quarterly projections on her laptop while I handled investor calls, and the natural rhythm of our collaboration felt like the most obvious thing in the world. We could work side by side for hours without feeling the need to compete for attention or justify our priorities to each other. "The West Coast expansion is ahead of schedule," Amanda said, looking up from her screen. "We'll be profitable in 3 new markets by the end of the year." "That's incredible. The team in San Francisco is exceeding every metric we set." "Speaking of metrics," Amanda said with a smile, "I have some personal ones to share too." She pulled out a small velvet box that made my heart race in the best possible way. "Amanda Rivera, what are you doing?" "David Chen, I'm beating you to the punch because I know you've been carrying a ring around for 2 weeks, and I refuse to wait any longer for you to find the perfect moment." I started laughing, partly from surprise and partly from relief. "You know me too well. I know that you've been researching engagement rings with the same methodical approach you use for everything else. And I know you're waiting for some grand romantic gesture. But David, this is our grand romantic gesture. Building something amazing together, supporting each other's dreams, being partners in every sense of the word." She was absolutely right. I had been carrying a ring for 2 weeks, trying to plan the perfect proposal that would somehow encapsulate everything I felt about our partnership and future together. "Amanda, you're brilliant, you're beautiful, and you make everything in my life better. Yes, I'll marry you, even though I was supposed to ask you. We'll call it a collaborative proposal," she said, sliding the ring onto my finger before I could do the same for her. The ring she'd chosen was perfect, classic, but distinctive. Exactly what I would have picked for myself if I'd thought to look. Like everything else about our relationship, it reflected how well we understood each other. That evening, we walked along the same lakeside path where Rachel and Brandon had strolled during that weekend that changed everything. The difference was that Amanda and I spent the time discussing business strategies and vacation plans, excited about both our professional collaboration and our personal future. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if Rachel hadn't invited Brandon to that weekend?" Amanda asked. "Sometimes. But I think we would have figured it out eventually. The incompatibility was too fundamental to ignore forever." "What do you think would have happened if you'd tried to make it work longer?" I considered the question seriously. "I think we would have made each other miserable for a few more years, then had a much messier breakup when we finally admitted the truth." "And Brandon and Rachel?" "They seemed genuinely happy together. Tyler showed me their engagement photos last month. They're planning some elaborate destination wedding that involves 3 different countries and a social media documentary." Amanda laughed. "That sounds perfect for them." "It does. They found someone who appreciates their approach to life instead of trying to change it." The news about Rachel and Brandon's engagement had surprised me initially, not because they'd gotten engaged, but because of how quickly it had happened. After her desperate attempts to win me back had failed, Rachel had apparently thrown herself into her relationship with Brandon with the same intensity she'd once directed towards social media content creation. According to mutual friends, she and Brandon had spent the past 6 months traveling together, documenting their adventures, and building what Rachel called a lifestyle brand around authentic love. They'd gotten engaged during a sunrise hot air balloon ride in Napa Valley, with professional photographers capturing every moment for their respective social media accounts. "It sounds exhausting," Amanda had said when I'd told her about it, but also kind of sweet that they found each other. That was the thing about Amanda that I loved most. She could acknowledge that other people's approaches to life were valid without feeling threatened by them or needing to adopt them herself. Tyler had been the one to fill me in on most of the details about Rachel's current situation, since we'd maintained mutual friendships despite our breakup. He'd also been instrumental in helping me navigate the transition from my old relationship to my new one. I have to admit, Tyler had said during one of our weekly business meetings, I was worried about you jumping into something new so quickly, after Rachel. But watching you and Amanda together, it's obvious this is what partnership is supposed to look like. He was right. The relationship with Amanda felt effortless in a way that my relationship with Rachel never had. We challenged each other intellectually, supported each other's ambitions, and somehow managed to make each other laugh even during the most stressful business challenges. The financial success of our company had exceeded every projection we'd made, but more importantly, we'd built something that felt sustainable and meaningful. Amanda's marketing expertise had helped us reach markets I'd never considered, while my technical innovations had provided the foundation for expansion strategies that seemed limitless. David, Amanda said as we reached the end of the lake path, can I tell you something I've never said before? Of course. That weekend when you called me from here, when we worked on the presentation together, I knew I was falling in love with you. Not just because of how well we worked together, but because you were so honest about what you wanted from life. I felt the same way. You made me realize what it was like to be with someone who amplified my strengths instead of asking me to apologize for them. Good, because I plan to keep amplifying your strengths for the next 50 years or so. Only 50? Well, after that, we'll negotiate an extension based on performance metrics. It was such a perfectly Amanda response that I found myself laughing again. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Easy, supportive, and grounded. In genuine compatibility, rather than dramatic gestures or constant negotiation. As we walked back to the cabin, I thought about how completely my life had transformed since that first weekend at Lake Tahoe. Rachel had invited Brandon to create drama and test my commitment, but instead, she'd given me permission to stop pretending I was someone I wasn't. The irony was that her attempt to introduce chaos had ultimately led to the most stable, fulfilling relationship of my life. Amanda and I had built our connection on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine compatibility, rather than trying to force incompatible pieces together. Amanda, I said as we reached the cabin door. Thank you. For what? For being exactly who you are. For understanding that building something meaningful takes patience and dedication. For making me feel like my best self instead of asking me to be someone different. David, that's what love is supposed to do. She was right, of course. Love wasn't supposed to be a constant negotiation or a test of how much you were willing to sacrifice your core values. It was supposed to be a partnership that made both people stronger, more capable, and more fulfilled than they could be alone. That night, as we sat on the deck planning our wedding and discussing the next phase of our business expansion, I realized that Rachel had actually given me the greatest gift possible. By forcing me to choose between pretending to be someone I wasn't, and being honest about what I actually wanted, she'd led me to a life that exceeded every dream I'd had about what partnership could be. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show you exactly what you don't want, so you can recognize what you do want when it appears. Rachel and Brandon had found their perfect match in each other, and Amanda and I had found ours. Everyone had ended up exactly where they belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.